So our unit this term is environment and culture. We've talked about environment quite a bit, but we need to have an agreement of what culture means. So in this video, we want to understand the meaning of culture and identify and understand some of the different aspects. So here are our inquiry questions for the unit, which are also written up on the board. You see some of them are specifically about culture. We have a factual one. What is the relationship between climate and culture, which you'll explore in your research project? The debatable question, are human cultures affected by the environment, or is the environment affected by human culture? Again, you'll explore that in your research project. And how do natural resources affect culture? These are some of the questions that we want to be able to answer about culture by the end of the term. One important thing to note is culture varies around the world. So here's an example of an English punk rocker, Buddhist monks in Myanmar. So there's all kinds of different cultures. Some of them are specific to certain countries, but I think with globalization, many cultures are spreading outside of their original places where they began. For example, manga and anime moving from Japan and spreading all over the world, K-pop music becoming famous outside of Korea. So if you want, you can pause the video and talk about this with your group. You can think about what do you think or know about Chinese culture or the culture of another group. What questions do you have about that culture, and is there anything that confuses you? And for exploration, you could think about how could you explore the topic of Chinese culture. And so these types of questions are good questions to think about and to ask yourself as you go through your research project. What do you know? What questions do you have? And how can you answer those questions? So let's look specifically at what is culture. One, you could say it's the customs, traditions, beliefs, and values that a group of people share. It includes the language that you speak, what you eat, what you do, things that you make, things you believe, the clothes that you wear. It's really everything. Groups that share these traits or share these similar ideas are called cultural groups. Right? Like we saw with the English punk rockers would be a cultural group. These are some things that make up culture in a little poster: celebration, jokes, holidays, food. Really is part of your culture. This is a good picture. It shows the cultural iceberg. You can see just like an iceberg on top, there's a little bit. These are the visible parts of culture. So the language, you can hear what people speak and the language that they use. Folklore are the stories that they tell, or their old stories maybe. Dress, meaning clothes, and their literature, their books. These are things that you can easily see and identify a culture with. Right? But just like an iceberg, there's much more underneath, things that you can't see. So you can't see people's core values, or maybe understand what the body language means, or gender roles, or any of these things underneath aren't easily visible. You have to really understand the culture and maybe ask questions to figure. So we can say there's two elements of culture. Material culture are is tangible as a physical reality. Tangible means you can touch it. So material culture is anything you can touch. Your clothes, buildings, food, all those things are have a physical reality. They're things that you can touch. The non-material culture are your ideas and beliefs, your language, things that aren't there. You can't physically touch them with your hands. Again, here's an example of a piece of material culture. Because you can touch it, you could think about what culture is this identified with? What does it tell you about the culture? So each thing can tell you a little bit of something. This is a totem pole that's usually associated with Native American tribes, and it can be for religious ceremonies. So it has to do with religion, or they could be monuments to different people. All right, non-material culture, again, things that you cannot touch. Your beliefs, your customs, or your customs are sort of like traditions, things that you do often. Language, symbols, music, government, all things that you cannot touch, right? But that have some meaning. So if you want, you can pause, you could do a little research about what this is, what culture it's a part of. You could make a list of some other cultural symbols, either from this culture or from a different one if you'd like, to get a better idea of it. Another thing that we can talk about with culture is that it creates social structures. And social structures are just ways of organizing people into smaller and smaller groups. Each group usually has a particular task or responsibility or something special associated with it that makes it different from other groups. Right? It might be protection, like the army or military, raising children, could be the family or a school group. Could be providing food, like a group of farmers, laws and teaching, things like that. Right? So here's a picture. In medieval Europe, the task of knights was to protect the community. In modern times, it's the task of the military and partly the government. Right? So again, they're smaller units of a culture. They can include any groups, your family, military, social class, religions, governments. In modern society, it's generally divided into upper, middle, and lower class, right? And each class has its own priorities or responsibilities that it needs to fit. And then there's the family as an example of a social group whose job or responsibility is to teach children the culture, to pass the customs, traditions, values, and ways of doing things on. So you'll use this information in your research project and on your test. So as you're discussing the ways in which the environment might affect our culture, you can think of how will it affect our material and non-material culture, right? How will it affect different aspects of our culture? Maybe the environment affects the way that we believe, or if you look back at the picture of the iceberg, maybe it affects the food that we eat, right? With climate change, and maybe we're unable to farm, so we have to change our eating habits. Right? So that's how we'll use this information. In your research project, you'll need to connect the ways our environment influences our culture and how our culture influences our environment. So you can use the language and some of the examples of what is culture from this video in your research project. And that is it for today.